Thanks so much, Kevin, and welcome everyone to this first session of this month's PhocusWire Pulse event. I am joined by industry veteran Mike Carlo, founder and CEO of XanderPay, which provides payment solutions for the hospitality industry. And as some quick background, Mike's past experience includes working for WEX, TransPay, Onyx CenterSource, and he's on the board of Hedna, where he has led payment efforts for nearly 10 years. Welcome, Mike.
Thanks a lot, Mitra. And it's always good to be called a veteran because that just means I'm getting old.
Okay, so we've certainly heard and covered a lot about issues related to payments in the last 18 months, related to refunds, cancellations, cash flow. Can you start us off by talking about some of the weaknesses or inefficiencies that the pandemic exposed as far as how payments are handled in the travel industry?
Yeah, I think that the biggest, looking back over the past 18 months, the biggest weakness was really a lack of foresight and contingency planning. And then, the reaction time in order to try to do things once we realized that we didn't have contingency plans as an industry. If you think about the airlines, they had mass refunds, and then a number of the OTAs had mass refunds that they had to go through, which was awful. The hotels didn't have mass refunds because they generally just had cancellations on bookings that would have been paid upon checkout. Yeah, I think you can argue that the airlines had a more difficult job, but they also had more options in that they could have held on to some of the cash and rebooked, provided vouchers, where the hotels were just without any options at that point. And I think when we look at the inefficiencies, the fractured processes for payments at hotels were really challenging to the hotel owners, the hotel brands, and especially to the travelers. And I know we'll go through that in a bit more detail, but I really do think it was the lack of any sense of contingency planning on a global level.
Okay, so let's talk about maybe, hindsight is 2020. What could have been done? What should have been done? What can be done for the future?
Well, I guess we need to move away from hindsight being 2020 to maybe hindsight needs to be 2022. So if I look at it from and the session is focused on hospitality payments, the hotels have long had this payment philosophy where you paid at the end of a trip, you paid at the property, and that goes through some of the legacy issues with relationships with hotel owners. One of the things that we've really been advocating over, well, advocating is probably a strong word, bringing up for consideration over the past 5 years is for a hotel brand to start to operate more like an OTA with regard to payments. I think that eliminates a lot of the problems. I think if you're, for instance, if you're a consumer and you're going to brand X in Paris and you book a room and the brand passes your credit card details along to one of the hotels, if that hotel goes out of business, you as a consumer have to battle with your credit card company to get your funds back. The hotel brand looks bad, and they may have 7 other hotels in the city that they could have reaccommodated you at. So I think part of the payment landscape has really been very much a legacy of 10, 15, 100 years ago, and I think that we're seeing an increased interest by the hospitality brands to try to envision things differently going forward.
Okay, can you explain just a bit more about that statement of, to operate more like the OTAs? I mean, so are you saying that, payment should be more upfront? It should be more at the brand level?
Yeah, I mean, I think the consumer is entering into a loyal consumer is entering into an agreement with a brand, not necessarily with an individual property. And when we talk about as part of some of the industry discussions we have, and we have a guest-centric industry working group, we talk about centralizing payments at a brand level, the way an OTA would be. So you have brand X that would process payments for all of its properties and sell all of its properties, offering payment methods based on where the guest is coming from, not where the property is located. So effectively taking the OTA model of payments and applying it to a hotel brand. Because right now, I know of very few hotel brands that process payments centrally. Instead, they still process everything at a property level. And there are cross-border implications of that and inefficiencies, and you don't have data about chargebacks. You don't have data about auth rates. It's a very complicated structure and inefficient, I would say.
Yeah, and so I know when we've talked in the past, you've really focused on the opportunities for more personalization, and particularly related to payment methods and things with people, internationally traveling. Can you talk a bit more about that?
Yeah, I think one of the examples that I like to use is really the outbound Chinese traveler. So WeChat Pay, Alipay are super prevalent in that company, in that country. Apologies. And if you have a Chinese guest going to a brand hotel in Beijing, they can use their phone and they can pay for that room and check in for that room in Beijing with WeChat Pay or Alipay. That same guest going to the same brand, to the same app on their phone, booking a room at a property in London, is not usually able to use WeChat Pay or Alipay because those aren't payment methods offered by the British hotel. And so, that's an interesting example of a situation where that is very extreme, but I think it's very illustrative. What a lot of hotel brands do in that situation is they refer the guest to, or if not refer, encourage or push a guest to an OTA to make that booking because the guest can pay with WeChat Pay on an OTA in market.
And so let's also talk about, one of the other issues that you referenced is the cash flow issue in the hospitality industry. So are you saying then that potentially in the future, the hospitality industry should be moving more to that airline model of pay when you book?
This is my personal view, not the views of any associations that I'm involved with. It might be the view of my company. Yes. I think that we have this false choice set up that prepaid bookings are non-refundable or prepaid bookings are a lower rate. If you look at the airline business, first class tickets are prepaid, and fully cancelable tickets are prepaid. So I do think that as more consumer alternate forms of payment are adopted around the world, and if you look at the cash flow concerns going forward, I really think the industry needs to move toward a centralized, guest-focused payment strategy, and I do think that I do think we need to move away from this postpaid model. It's one of very few products where you pay after the product is consumed.
Yeah, I'd imagine it all comes down to just transparency as far as terms and conditions and cancellation possibilities and all of that, which I know is going to be discussed in some of our upcoming sessions. You just referenced their alternative payment options. Can we talk a bit about that? What do you see happening, and particularly any preferences developing related to some of the younger generations and how they want to pay and the implications there?
Yeah, I think the alternate payment options, like the Chinese example before, they're going to be very country specific. And if you're a U.S. hotel that has 99% U.S. travelers, the whole notion of alternate forms of payment isn't as important. But if you have Dutch guests traveling or Canadian guests visiting, there are different payment options, and certainly there's foreign currency implications. But as far as generationally, I know Venmo is. I'd love to pay with everything with Venmo, but the reality is Venmo, Apple Pay, they all have an underlying standard payment method behind them. So I think I view that to be more of a a mechanism than a payment method.
Okay. What about, we've heard a lot about the blurring of the lines between business travel and leisure travel, particularly in the last year and a half, as many people can work from anywhere and combine that with a vacation, that sort of thing, as travel starts to reopen. Any issues that creates or opportunities?
I think that's a great question, and I think it means that there'll be higher average transaction values because people will lump a few weeks holiday onto a business trip. But I think from a payment standpoint, it's largely going to be business as usual. I think from an expense report standpoint, it's going to require a bit more analysis of expense reports on behalf of controllers and others in each company.
Okay, so let's talk also about B2B payments in hospitality.
Mm-hmm.
What are some of the issues there, or some of the trends that you're seeing?
Well, I mean, you mentioned transparency, so I'll share that we are focused on B2B payments, and the industry groups that I've been involved with and the philosophy of our company is to look at B2B payments and right size the cost of a payment with the commensurate risk. In the past 10 years, there's been a growth of virtual credit cards, and virtual credit cards are an amazing product for many solutions, but they are an expensive product, especially in markets with exotic currencies. So we're trying to create a fairness between the hotel and the OTA or other third-party booking that's based on the risk of it. So with a virtual credit card model, the OTA issues the card, pays to the hotel runs that card through its ordinary credit card processing channels, and they pay a standard. Well, they pay an average rate for those cards, and then the model for the VCC is then there's a rebate back to the OTA. So the OTA is receiving a commission, and then they're receiving a fairly significant portion of the interchange back as a referral fee for issuing that card. We've taken an approach, and this isn't designed to be a sales pitch, but we have taken an approach that there needs to be a better balance, and we need to look at the risks associated with that. Everything can be automated with the growth in technology. There's a lot of opportunity for automating processes where we weren't able to before. And just to give you a sense, HEDNA and HDNG just issued technical specifications for industry standard operation of a payment manager, which is designed to create a more efficient B2B payment processing solution, so that the hotels won't be receiving faxes from OTAs and silly things like that.
Yeah, I forget that there's still fax machines out there.
Yes, it's remarkable.
Yeah. So, you've talked about a lot of potential ideas and strategies here. I'm wondering now if we can talk a bit about, so what are some of the hurdles to this innovation? And I also wonder has the pandemic accelerated some of this, or has it actually put a bit of a stall because, resources are tight and all of that?
That is a fantastic question. And I will say that in a panel discussion probably about 4 months ago, someone from a major hotel brand said something that I'm going to paraphrase. Prior to the pandemic, the biggest challenge with innovation in hospitality payments was inertia, and things had been largely the same for decades, if not back 2,000 years. During pandemic and post pandemic, there is no inertia, and because of that, I think we're seeing an opportunity for innovation in the next couple of years. We're seeing historically the hotel owners, I shouldn't say the hotel owners, the brand's fear of the reaction of the hotel owners had driven a lot of hesitancy. The other thing we're also seeing now is hotel owners, because of the horrible economic conditions that they've been in for the past 18 months, are more open to suggestions on how they can be more efficient.
Okay.
So we are extraordinarily hopeful that this is the opportune time for a change.
And I'm curious, some of these issues that you've raised, are they fairly universal, or are they more, regionally based, or, concentrated in certain markets that are maybe some are more ahead versus behind?
Yeah, I think they're fairly global. There will be markets that are, largely self-sustaining, like the US market, where that's a bit, there isn't the percentage of cross-border guests, and a lot of these efficiencies drive out of that group of folks. But in general, I think it's a global initiative, and I think that the savings that can be generated through a guest-centric approach, centralized approach, are going to be comparable in most countries and hotel brands. Even.
Yeah. One thing I'm realizing I didn't really address, because a lot of your references have been to brands, and I'm assuming, some hotels associated with the chains, that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. Anything just related to some of the independent properties that comes to mind, as we've got a couple minutes left?
Yeah, the independent properties, it's a little bit more challenging because of, the card scheme rules and banking rules. I think there may be somebody on your panel discussion later who better address this, but I think there are companies out there that are trying to enable the smaller hotels or the individual hotels with more global solutions, but that is something it would be very difficult for them to do on their own, given regulatory requirements.
Okay. So as we just have a couple minutes left, I'm wondering, just kind of recap for us, or share with us any of your predictions for the future, as far as any new technologies, new strategies. What are we going to be seeing develop in this space?
Yeah, I think the previously mentioned HEDNA HTNG technical specifications really do change the lay of the land for B2B transactions. And quite honestly, there's an opportunity there for hotel brands to centralize payments and use the same platform. I do think over the course of the pandemic, there has been quite a bit more transparency and understanding of what the inefficiencies are. I think what we will see is a couple of major brands will be disruptive. And as they are disruptive, as is so often the case in this industry, we expect that others will examine their solutions and try to, implement something similar. I expect that in 3 to 5 years, the payment landscape of hospitality will be significantly different and far more efficient and much more guest focused. I mean, it really is one of the, for an industry that calls it hospitality, from a payment standpoint, it's incredibly inhospitable. So that's what I see coming up in the next 3 years.
Yeah. I mean, I guess it is one, if you think about it. There hasn't been, when I think about my experience as a consumer and traveling and booking and paying for a hotel, hasn't changed much.
No.
No.
And I think that some of the solutions that are coming out to make it easier for the consumer are great, but inevitably, when you have something that makes it easier for the consumer, it's somebody is going to try to what am I trying to say? I'm trying to say that with some of these things, like the installment payments or some sort of credit products. They're great and they're very helpful, but there's a cost associated with that, with them in some way, and we need to figure out who's going to bear the cost. Is it the consumer? Is it the hotel? And that's where I think there'll be a lot of modifications to what we're doing over the next few years.
Okay, wonderful. Well, thank you, Mike, very much for
Pleasure.
joining us. Appreciate it. And we will catch up with you in the future, see how things are developing. Thanks.
Perfect. Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye.